In 1964, America was a nation of contrasts. While the space race launched humanity's dreams toward the stars in the country's beating heart, life followed a rhythm dictated by the Earth, the sun, and the seasons. It was a world of hard work, calloused hands, and an unwavering faith in things that were simple and understandable. But what if, on a perfectly ordinary morning, in a quiet field in upstate New York, the cosmos decided to pay a visit? And what if this visit wasn't a fleeting flyover or an incomprehensible flash of light, but a direct contact, a 2-hour conversation that could redefine our place in the universe? This is not the story of a violent abduction or a mass sighting. This is the story of Gary Wilcox, a 27-year-old farmer whose impeccable reputation and modest life became the unlikely epicenter of one of the most detailed and bizarre third-degree encounters in the history of ufology. What was said that morning between a man of the earth and beings from another world carries implications that echo to this day. Prepare yourself, because what you are about to hear is the anatomy of an impossible dialogue. Newark Valley, New York. A name that evokes peace, a sanctuary of tranquility nestled in Tioga County. In 2021, its population was just over 3,000. In 1964, it was an even greater bastion of silence and tradition. It was here, on a vast 300-acre farm, that Gary Wilcox lived. Gary was not a man of ecstasies. At 27, he was the personification of rural integrity, married, a father of young children, religious, a man who neither drank nor smoked. His community knew him as someone calm and discreet, whose word was his bond. His life was a symphony of routines. Waking before the sun, tending to the animals, milking the cows, and then climbing onto his tractor to nurture the land that sustained him. It was a solitary, arduous, but honest job. On the morning of April 24th, 1964, the symphony began just like any other day. The air was cool, the sky clear. After finishing with the animals, Gary started his tractor and headed to one of the farm's slopes to spread manure. It was a dirty but vital job. It was about 10 a.m. when, amidst the roar of the engine and the smell of the earth, something shattered the harmony of that day. A flash of light, coming from the hill, near a field adjacent to the barn. Initially, Gary ignored it. It could have been anything, but the light persisted, flashing intermittently, like a metallic distress signal reflecting the morning sun. His pragmatic mind immediately sought a logical explanation. Had a small plane, perhaps a helicopter, crashed? Concerned? He guided the tractor toward the gleam, his good Samaritan's heart prepared to offer help. He had no idea that as he approached, he wasn't heading toward an accident, but toward an encounter with the inconceivable. The sound of the tractor dies, replaced by a dense silence, broken only by the gentle wind and the sound of his own boots on the dirt. The hill was about 300 feet high. As he climbed, the shape of the object became clearer, and the airplane theory began to fall apart. This thing had no wings. It had no tail. There was no wreckage. At the top, he stopped. Floating mere inches from the ground, without any visible support, was an oval object, about 20 feet long by 13 feet wide. Its surface was a smooth, polished metal, perhaps aluminum, but without a single seam, rivet, or window. It was a perfect shell, a metallic egg that seemed to have been born whole, not built. It radiated silence. There was no hum, no heat, no vibration, just presence. Curiosity overcame his initial fear. Gary moved closer. He reached out his hand and touched the surface. The temperature was neutral. He pushed. Nothing. He gave it a few kicks, an almost childish gesture of frustration and disbelief. The object was solid as a rock, firm, real. As his mind struggled to categorize this anomaly, the unthinkable happened. From beneath the object, as if passing through solid metal, two beings emerged. Gary saw no door, no ramp, no opening. They simply appeared. They were small, about 4 feet tall, with the build of a child. Their bodies were encased in a light-colored, tight-fitting metallic suit, as seamless as the craft that had carried them. Their heads were covered by a helmet that completely concealed any facial features. No eyes, nose, or mouth were visible. They were androgynous, anonymous figures, alien in their very essence. Each carried a square tray, about 12 inches across, made of the same material as the ship. Upon them, the reason for their visit became apparent: soil samples, tufts of grass, roots, and small stones. they were collecting. Gary was less than 3 feet from them. The air grew heavy. The initial shock gave way to a deep, primal fear. His mind screamed at him to run, to flee this surreal scene. Were they children in an elaborate costume? A prank? He took a step back, preparing to escape, but then a voice broke the silence. "Do not be afraid. We have spoken with others of your kind before." The sentence didn't come from where a mouth should be. Gary had the distinct impression that the voice didn't travel through the air to his ears, but rather bloomed directly inside his mind. And although he understood every word perfectly, the language itself was strange, guttural, completely unknown. The fear, inexplicably, dissipated, replaced by a forced calm and unnatural tranquility. The desire to flee evaporated. Thus began one of the most extraordinary conversations ever reported. For about 2 hours, the farmer and the cosmic researchers exchanged information. The beings explained they came from another planet, one Gary understood to be Mars. They described their world as rocky and sandy, unsuitable for cultivation. Their people faced an agricultural crisis, unable to grow food. Therefore, they traveled to worlds like Earth, studying soils, plants, and farming methods, hoping to find a solution to take back home. They had observed humanity. They had seen Gary before. They explained that they preferred to land in remote rural areas because urban centers, with their electrical and radio cacophony, interfered with their craft's performance. They asked Gary questions. Questions no human had ever asked him. How did his tractor work? What was the purpose of the manure he spread? How did he know when to plant each crop? And Gary, the simple man of the land, answered. He told them everything he knew about the wisdom of the earth, about crop rotation, about soil enrichment. In turn, the beings spoke of their technology. They said that above 160 feet in altitude, their ships became invisible, although they were sometimes picked up by radar. They explained they could only make the long journey from Earth every 2 years. At the time, Gary didn't understand the significance of this. Today, we know that the orbital alignment between Earth and Mars, which optimizes the journey, occurs every 2 years and 2 months. A frighteningly precise detail. They showed interest in the fertilizer Gary used. He, in a gesture of interplanetary hospitality, offered them a bag. But the beings refused, saying they couldn't stray far from the ship and that their time was running out. In a moment of courage or madness, Gary offered to go with them to help. The response was a grim warning. Their planet's atmosphere was unsuitable for human biology. He would not survive. The conversation, however, took a darker turn. The beings were not just scientists, they were also messengers. They warned that humanity, by sending rockets, missiles, and satellites into space, was contaminating the solar system, affecting other planets in ways we didn't understand. They advised that we stop sending humans into space. And then they made a specific and chilling prophecy. They said that American astronauts John Glenn and Virgil Gus Grissom, along with 2 Russian cosmonauts, would lose their lives due to exposure to elements from space. Before leaving, they gave Gary one last piece of advice. For his own good, it would be better not to tell anyone about the encounter. It wasn't a threat, but a friendly warning. The decision was his. With that, the beings retreated and re-entered the ship in the same mysterious way they had emerged. The object hovered for a few seconds. A subtle sound, like an idling engine, filled the air. Then it took off, first slowly, vertically, and then shot across the valley, disappearing into the sky in the blink of an eye. Gary stood there, stunned, noticing the absence of everything that should have happened. There was no gust of wind, no heat, no roar of a powerful propulsion. Just silence. The only trace of the visit was a strange reddish dust where the ship had floated and small, square imprints in the dirt, about 2.5 inches across, the footprints of the visitors. Dejected, Gary went home. His first call was to his mother. He had to tell someone. The symphony of his life had been permanently altered by an impossible note. The next day, true to his offer, he took a bag of fertilizer and left it near the encounter site. When he returned later, the bag was gone. Was it them? Or, as his rational mind tried to argue, could anyone have passed by and taken? Gary's mother, unable to keep such a monumental secret, told the story. And in a small town where reputation is everything, Gary Wilcox's story spread like wildfire. Surprisingly, few doubted him. His character was his greatest shield. The story inevitably attracted the attention of investigators. NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, one of the most respected organizations of the time, classified the case as a close encounter of the third kind. Legendary figures in ufology, like J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée, examined the reports, unable to find a conventional explanation. But the most shocking piece of the puzzle came from an investigator named Ray Stanford. He noticed a coincidence that was simply too big to be ignored. On the very same day, April 24th, 1964, nearly 2,000 miles away, in the town of Socorro, New Mexico, a police officer named Lonnie Zamora also had an encounter. He reported seeing an oval object with two small beings in silvery suits standing beside it. The description was almost identical to Gary's. Was it possible that the same craft had made two stops on the same day on a continental collection mission? The Zamora case would become one of the most credible in U.S. history, lending immense weight to Gary's account. Still, the absence of irrefutable physical evidence opened the door for skepticism. A neighbor of Gary's, a former radar technician, took notes and contacted the police. The investigating officer noted minor discrepancies between what Gary told him and what the neighbor had written down, possibly a simple case of broken telephone. A rumor also surfaced that Gary had admitted to drinking socially, leading to the theory that he might have dreamed or hallucinated. But this accusation clashes violently with reality. The encounter happened on a work morning when Gary's sobriety was a professional necessity, and his reputation as a non-drinker was widely known. Faced with the stalemate between testimony and lack of proof, the investigation turned to the man himself. In 1968, psychiatrist Dr. Berthold Schwartz conducted an exhaustive psychological evaluation of Gary using standardized tests like the MPI. The conclusion was unequivocal. Gary Wilcox was emotionally stable, honest, reserved, and had absolutely no tendency toward fanciful inventions or mental disorders. Psychologically, he was the perfect witness. And what about the physical evidence? Sources speak of government agents who, weeks later, allegedly detected abnormal levels of radioactivity at the landing site. It's reported that the soil in the area became infertile, and that Gary himself suffered from burns on his body consistent with radiation exposure. But, as in so many cases, the official reports that could confirm this remain inaccessible, shrouded in secrecy. That leaves the prophecy. The warning about the astronauts was the most testable element of the story. And here, the reality is complex. John Glenn lived to be 95 years old, a clear refutation. But Virgil Gus Grissom tragically died 3 years later, in 1967, in a fire during a ground test of Apollo 1. And one of the likely Russian cosmonauts, Vladimir Komarov, also died 3 years later, in 1967, during the re-entry of his Soyuz 1 capsule. The prophecy was not 100% accurate, but it was a direct hit for 2 of its 4 targets, both dying exactly 3 years after the contact. Was it a lucky guess? A misinterpreted prediction? Or a warning whose outcome was altered by subsequent? In the end, the case of Gary Wilcox doesn't offer us an easy answer. It leaves us in a fascinating and uncomfortable territory, balanced between the testimony of an honest man and the absence of irrefutable physical proof. His story is a persistent echo, a question that has hung in the air for more than half a century. But our exploration doesn't end with the end of the account. In fact, this is where it truly begins, and it opens up to you, to our community. And so I ask you directly, had you ever heard of Gary Wilcox's incredible conversation? Perhaps in an old book, an internet forum, or a documentary that brought up details we didn't cover here. If so, let us know in the comments. Is there a fact, a curiosity, or an important point that was left out? Your contribution is more than a comment. It's a piece that can immensely enrich our discussion and open new horizons for everyone investigating this enigma with us. It's crucial to remember, here at Alien Cases, we are not the owners of the truth. That has never been our intention. Our mission is to act as architects of mysteries, not as bearers of final answers. After all, what is truth? Perhaps it's a search, not a destination. The stories we tell are the result of research into reports already published on the internet in books, documentaries, and other sources. And so that our journey together is always transparent, we want you to know the illustrations that give form to these scenes, and even this voice narrating this incredible story, are the products of artificial intelligence. We don't invent anything. We only collect what has already been told, supposedly real stories that many of you may have never heard or knew with different details. And that is absolutely normal. It's okay. Each version of an account is a different echo of the same fascinating story. If you support this open and collaborative way of exploring the unknown, your like is the most powerful signal we can receive. It shows us that we should continue to unearth these cases, to build these narratives, and above all, to share this quest for answers with all of you.